Welcome, Gunrunner.
Introducing the new Atari XE Video Game System, the only game system that teaches you to fly. It comes with Flight Simulator 2 and a keyboard to play many advanced computer games. But that's not all. You can pilot your Atari through hundreds of other exciting games, because it also comes with a target gun and the great game Bug Hunt. And it plays the most challenging joystick games, like Missile Command. The new Atari XE Video Game System, the only one that has it all.
Hey everybody, Kieran aka The Laird here, and I'm back with another hardware review for you. And those of you who've been following me for a long time, and indeed used to watch my old channel, might remember me reviewing this bad boy right here, the Atari XE Games System. That video was actually one of the most popular videos on my old channel, and in fact it was probably one of the first videos I did on my old channel that got a decent amount of views. But I've never re-uploaded it onto this channel for several reasons. One reason being that it was quite bad quality, because it was an early video that I did, so it would have been in obviously a smaller screen format and much lower resolution. Another reason is because I was unhappy with the length of it. I filmed it as one long video and it was over an hour long. And although it did well on my old channel, I mean, it had something like 10,000 views or something. So it did really well. I always thought it would have done a lot better had I made it shorter, because basically the first half an hour of the video was me looking at the system. But then I did half an hour looking at games, which I really should have split into a separate video. And I did think about re-uploading it in two parts. That was something I did consider at one point because of that. But yeah, I always felt like I made a mistake making it as long as I did. The analytics for the video showed that as well, that a lot of people had actually pretty much just watched the first half an hour and then switched off. So yeah, it was always all my thinking that I might remake it or come back to it or something. And lots and lots and lots of people have been asking me about it actually for this channel, and in a few discussions I've been having on forums and social media and stuff about the XE Game System. Quite a few people asked me what happened to the old video. Quite a few people asked me to re-upload the old video, and when I mentioned to some people that I might remake it, they were like, oh, please do, I loved that video, please do. So those XE fans out there, we were pleased to see that I finally got round to it. I had so much stuff that I'd been picking up from Marketplace to review that it just kind of kept getting pushed to the back of the queue, this one. And actually still have some Marketplace stuff to review, but I decided to drag this one out just because, again, somebody asked me for it about 2 days ago, and it was fresh in my mind. So, yes, it is the Atari XE Game System we're looking at today. And I want to start by giving you some backstory actually on how I came across mine. Now, I'd always loved the look of this. I'd first played on one at JagFest, and I think it was JagFest in 2004, I believe, that I first played on one. Someone had one there, and I'd seen one before, because I remember these being about when I was a kid. I remember seeing them in Toys R Us. Funnily enough, that's the place I remember seeing them. And actually catalogues, I remember seeing them like the home shopping catalogues as well. I've talked a lot about that actually. I did a video on Atari XE Game System facts, which I'll link up in the top right hand corner if you want to go and watch that, because that contains lots of interesting back information that relates directly to this video, and I talk a lot about the catalogue connection in there. So I'll link that video up there. But anyway, so I do remember seeing them. I remember thinking it looked cool back then, and when I finally saw one sort of in the flesh to play myself at JagFest in 2004, I thought it was literally the coolest looking console I'd ever seen. I couldn't get over how 80s it was, with these pastel buttons and angular lines, and there's obviously some definite styling uniformity going on, because it obviously looks similar to the 130 XE, which I've put behind it in many ways, and obviously 65 XE looks exactly similar to 130. I just grabbed that one for this video. And obviously the Atari ST, same case colour, these same angular lines and stuff like that. The big difference is obviously these large pastel buttons and the huge Atari logo as well. But we'll talk a little bit more about the design of the system in a little while. But yeah, I'd liked it, and I had actually had an Atari 8-bit before. I'd had an 800 XL, which I'd used a bit, but not much. And it's kind of just ended up collecting dust actually in my collection, I have to say. I'd never really investigated more, because other systems had always taken over from in the collecting aspect. And I actually sold my 800 XL that I had, my original one, with a 1050 disk drive and all that, because somebody offered me £100 for it, and I'd only paid a tenner for it. So I decided, I was quite short money at the time. I just moved into a new flat, and so I decided to take the £100. And then later on I regretted it, because I started to investigate the Atari 8-bit machines online and emulation and stuff. I found more and more and more about them that I liked. And I did think that I'd quite like one of these ones, because I loved the design of the XE Games System. So randomly one evening I did a search on eBay to see what came up, and someone had literally just listed one on a buy it now for £50 with 14 games, joystick, light gun, keyboard, the whole package. The only thing that was missing was a box. I don't have a box. It wasn't boxed, which is a shame. But for £50 for that package, I couldn't turn it down. I mean, that's got to be worth hundreds and hundreds now. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. I've never hit the buy it now button so quickly as I did when I saw that. And it arrived, and obviously it was in immaculate condition, no yellowing on it at all. It's in brilliant condition. Everything working perfectly. Could not have been happier. And then I set about collecting for it and picked up lots more games. And I'll go into the games. I've put some around it in a little while. But yeah, that's my background on the video, and on the system. And since then, it's been my Atari 8-bit of choice, and I've really fallen in love with the XE Games System. I mean, I've done all sorts of stuff around it, because obviously I did a couple of articles in Retro Gamer on the Atari 8-bit, but one of those was actually specifically about the XE Game System, because that's never been covered really, the history of how that came about. And I spoke to some people like Chuck Peavy, who programmed some of the games for it, and Daryl Still, who's the UK marketing manager for Atari, about it and how it was sold and stuff like that. And the machine does have some really, really interesting back history. And of course, such is my love for the Atari 8-bit range in general, that I wrote this book too a few years back. Cheap plug, a compendium of Atari 8-bit games. It's actually my third print book that I did, but more importantly, this book, compared to the ones I did before it, which was ZX Spectrum and Atari 2600, this followed a slightly different format. I tweaked things somewhat to improve the existing concept. The biggest of those being the addition of developer interviews on top of the 260 game reviews. So for example, this book, if I can find it, I have done a separate review for this book, which I'll link in the top right hand corner. I've got a interview with Daryl Still, who, as well as being Atari UK marketing manager, he also, his company Top 10 Software published quite a lot of Atari 8-bit games when he was there, prior to joining Atari. And of course, I do have an interview with the one and only Chuck Peavy, who did more XE games than anybody else, including stuff like Lode Runner and brilliant Panther for Mastertronic. So yeah, that was a cheap plug there for my book. I'll stick that down there for the moment. But yeah, let's go back to that backstory for a moment. So how did these come about and why? Obviously, for those who may not know, I'm sure everyone does though, the Atari XE Games System is a consoleized Atari 8-bit computer. So internally, the hardware inside this is identical to the 65 XE computer. That's the 130 XE. Obviously, the 130 is 128K and the 65 XE was 64K. So yes, this has 64K of memory and all the same chipset as the Atari 8-bit computers. So there's absolutely no differences in terms of the hardware inside this to the 65 XE. The main difference is obviously there's a console. It's just got a cartridge slot. And it was sold in three variations, which I'll just go into. Sorry, not three variations, two variations, which I'll just go into quickly now. One was just as a console, and one was a deluxe setup as a computer with a keyboard and light gun and everything like that. It was actually a slightly different pack in the UK as well, that some retailers did, where it came with a cassette recorder as well, so you actually had a full computer setup. But the normal Atari Deluxe bundle was the console, the keyboard, which we'll show a bit more later, and a joystick, and the light gun, which I'm just trying to grab, it's behind me, and our light gun. So we'll have a look at those in more detail in a little while. And that was the cassette recorder that some came in some UK bundles, so you could use tape games with it as well. So it was a console fully expandable into a home computer. Something that had never really been done properly in that way before, and I'll lead into that because obviously at this point Atari had the 2600 on the market and the 7800, because though the XE computers were released in 1985, the same year as the ST, the XE Game System console was released in 1987, so a couple of years later. So yeah, they already had the 2600 Junior and the 7800 Pro system on the market as consoles, a budget option and a premium option. So a lot of people have said, well, why did they release another console? You know, they're basically taking away their own customers. What was the point in that? Now, there was a good point to it, and it was twofold, really. The first was that Atari Corporation was sitting on absolutely stacks of inventory, tons of Atari 8-bit games that they wanted to get rid of. They had already obviously launched the XE computers. That wasn't really shifting the games so much, or people were going for cheaper disc or tape games. I bet a lot, especially in Europe with these as well. I mean, the XE computers sold very, very well in Eastern Europe, for example, where everyone was using discs and tapes. So they still wanted to try and shift a lot of this inventory. The second thing is that they'd been speaking to retailers and catalogs and people like that, and saying, what can we do for you? What do you want from a game system? Obviously the Nintendo NES was riding high in North America at that point, making tons of cash, and one of the reasons why the NES had been a success was because it was initially wasn't promoted as a console. It was initially promoted as a kind of educational toy in many ways. That's why they put Rob the Robot with it, to make it seem a bit more serious and not just a kiddie games console. So these retailers said to Atari, what we'd like is a console that can also be a computer. So something that's going to appeal to kids, but it's also going to appeal to the adults who want to buy something for their kids. So Atari went, okay, went away and came up with this, which is obviously a console that attracts the kids, especially with the design, with cartridge games in big bright boxes. But it can also be fully upgraded into a computer and used seriously. So you could use business software on it, or spreadsheets and word processors and educational software, and connect it up to printers and modems and all of that serious stuff through the ports on the back. So yes, it was ideal, and a lot of people as well cite the XE Games System as being a failure, which is wrong because it was actually very successful. Atari produced 250,000 XE Game Systems. That's it. They never made any more. They sold all of them through into retail. From my understanding is they actually produced about 125,000 each PAL and NTSC. So I think it was kind of split into two. Yeah, and they sold them all through to retail, every single one. No return inventory. It was never discounted. Maybe by some retailers it might have been, but Atari certainly never ran any discount. They sold all of them. And the reason why they stopped producing them is because they shifted all that backlog of games that they had for the Atari 8-bit system as well, the old inventory that they were trying to sell through. So their job was basically done. It had been developed for a certain purpose. By the time most of that inventory was sold through, we were in the late 80s. Atari had plans actually to introduce a new console called the Super XE Game System, which I have covered on the channel, which would have been a 16-bit console using the same actual processor that the SNES has in it, because that processor was backwards compatible with the 6502, which was found in the Atari 8-bit range, and also the NES. That was the plan. I mean, the SNES was meant to be backwards compatible and never was. So they planned this Super XE, which would be backwards compatible, but would be 16-bit and would be allowed to use all the same software, obviously, plus these new advanced games with loads of colours and better sound, etc., etc. But that was cancelled, and the reason why that was cancelled actually was because Atari signed a deal to distribute the Sega Genesis, as it became. It was Atari that gave it the Genesis name, actually, the Mega Drive in North America. And unfortunately, that got to very late stages. It was all ready to go, but Atari wanted the European distribution rights as well. But Sega wouldn't agree to that, and so the deal ended up getting cancelled pretty much at the last minute. And Sega went alone, but they actually kept the Genesis name, which was something that Atari came up with. I've covered that story on my channel too, so I'll link that video up in the corner as well for anyone that's interested watching that, in the description. So let's have a look around the system so we can see what it's about. Now we've covered some of that really, really interesting history. So obviously we've looked at the front. We've got our angular cartridge port. We've got our pastel buttons. So we've got our power button over here, plus start, select, option, reset. So all the main buttons that are on the side of the computers, or along the top in this case with the XE. On the X800 XL, they were down the side. So we've got all those important buttons that we need to do things. On the back there, we have television, monitor, and audio. Now, it might seem weird saying monitor and audio, but that, of course, means you can connect up like component cables to connect it to a monitor. You've got a separate one for audio and a separate one for video, which is quite cool. And then we've got a peripheral there, which is actually our SIO port. So that's how we can connect up tape recorders, disk drives, printers, all of that stuff, because we have our SIO port. And then we've got the power, obviously. It's pretty straightforward. On this side, we have actually have another SIO port, which is useful. You've got two, so obviously one you could connect your tape recorder or disk drive to, and the one on the back you could say connect a printer to, if you're using it for serious use. Then on the other side we have our angular standard Atari DB9 joystick ports. And there we have it, Atari XE Games System, Atari Corporation, Sunnyvale, and serial number, all that. You can see what great condition even that's in, made in Taiwan. And little feet, rubber feet that it sits on. So, I mean, some people call it Fisher Price, or say that it's, you know, a kiddie design and they don't like it. But I seem to find that it's Marmite. People either love it or absolutely hate it. I find that more people love the design, and I adore it. I think it's an amazing design. So once we've got that console, as I say, the standard package came just like this. You've got the console. You've got your nicely coloured CX40 joysticks. This was a cool touch that they did these joysticks to match the look of the console. And it's a shame that they didn't bundle these colour sticks with the ST as well, with it being that colour. And actually the XEs, most of them came with black joysticks. But they did these lovely kind of beigey grey, off-white, whatever you want to call it, joysticks to go with the XE Games System. I've got 2 of them actually, which is really cool, because I picked up another one for cheap at an event, actually, £4, which is great because they go for stupid prices online as well. So that was your basic package, and then built in to your ROM on this console is Missile Command. So by holding down, I think it's the option button, so the optional select, I can't remember now, I think it's the option button though. When you boot the console up, it boots straight into Missile Command. So you can play it, there you go, built-in game, and away you go. Brilliant stuff. And there's my other joystick actually, I just grabbed it. It's a little bit yellowed though, as you can see. It's not as nice as that one. Then our deluxe package came with 2 more games. So we got Flight Simulator there, which is kind of to promote the fact, it was used heavily in the advertising because Atari wanted to promote that this was also a computer. And it could be used as a computer, which the NES couldn't. And in the advertising, they really pushed the fact that this was a you know, could be a computer, and it had advanced games like Flight Simulator 2 that you couldn't play on a console. And then also Bug Hunt. These came unboxed, by the way. You didn't get a box or anything with these. They came like that. And Bug Hunt was in the deluxe package as well. And Bug Hunt, of course, was the game that we could use with the light gun. So there we go, we had our light gun, because the NES of course had the Zapper, so Atari created the XG1 light gun, which is this of course, and that gun can also be used with the Atari 7800 and 2600, because although there was supposed to be a separate gun for those, it was orange in colour, Atari never bothered producing it, so you had to get these XE system guns instead to use with the 7800 and 2600 as well. And as I mentioned, some of the UK packages also stuck a tape recorder, Atari Tape XC12 tape recorder with them as well. So you could play tape games, because particularly in the UK, computer owners were used to playing games on tape. And there was a glut of tape software available. Lots of the budget game publishers in the UK, people like Players and Codemasters, Mastertronic, Atlantis, High Tech, loads of the big budget publishers were also putting out games for the Atari 8-bit as well. It was quite well supported, and that was because of the launch of the XE computers, the old 800 XLs. There was a campaign where they were heavily discounting them through Dixon's, selling them for about 100 quid. So that really built up the user base, and there was lots of budget publishers supporting it. There was a few full price publishers like Gremlin and Domark who did the odd game, but not massively. But there was loads of budget software, all on tape pretty much. But probably most importantly of all was with the deluxe package, you got this keyboard. So I might have to move the camera out a minute so you can see this a bit better. So this keyboard has 2 little hooks on the top of it, as you can see, plus a help button on there as well. And there's nothing really much on the bottom apart from these rubber feet, and all you do is literally hook it to the front like that. So now, as you can see, oh no, not as you can see because I've disconnected it, it fits together as one long unit and looks damn smart as well, doesn't it? Really does. So now we have our, let's move that back, our XE Games System with the keyboard. The keyboard is pretty much the same as the ones on the XE computers. It's a bit cheap, it's a bit springy, it's not the best keyboard in the world, but it works. And obviously it meant that you could use the the XE Games System as a computer, and obviously that hanging down is our SIO cable to connect it up. But these keyboards go for quite a lot of money now on their own, because XE Game Systems are quite rare, because obviously there's only quite a small amount of them produced. But more so because there was the two packages sold, the standard and the deluxe pack. A lot of people bought the standard packs that didn't come with a keyboard, and so the keyboards are even harder to find, especially in nice condition and good working order. So that's why I was particularly pleased to get the keyboard with it. That also means the light guns are rarer as well, because they only came in deluxe pack as well. So yeah, so it's a bit easier to, it's still not very easy to pick up the console only units, but a lot harder to find them with the keyboard and the light gun as well. So very thankful that I've got the full package. So let's talk about the games then. So there was a new design, obviously created for the XE games, which is these nice blue boxes that you can see in the background. Really striking design. They were a bit bigger than the original Atari 8-bit boxes. They're actually saying that there were some really huge box Atari 8-bit games as well. But just to show what the box that came before it, which was the same size as 7800 and 2600 box, which is that one, it's just slightly larger. And actually this is important, because you'll see from some of these games, these older games, and this is what I was talking about Atari wanting to shift inventory, is that some of these games, like these that I'm putting down here, were old games. So we have the silver box Atari 8-bit games here, like Eastern Front. That's actually a slightly bigger box. We have the original Atari 400, 800 games, like this one, Super Breakout and Galaxian, there, as you can see behind. And they had tons of this stuff in the inventory. They just stuck these labels on, saying also plays on the XE Game System and XE XL computers. So putting them on the shelf alongside the blue box games at a slightly cheaper price. I think they were selling these games for about £10, $10, whereas the blue box games would be like 15, 20. So they were cheaper to buy. Obviously stuff like that, Super Breakout, you needed a set of paddles to play actually as well. So but the paddles were easy to get hold of, because you just bought the 2600 paddles. Even says that on the back. Actually, the back of the box is really basic. It just says that you need paddles. I don't know what the Galaxian one's like. Not much better, just a screenshot. Got Robotron there, so that's a bit of a nicer box. So yeah, they would just slap these stickers on all over the place for the games that could be played, and thus help them shift all that inventory that they were sitting on. So the blue box games, well, there were several different types. So we had some classic games, Atari 8-bit games, that were re-released. So for example, David's Midnight Magic there was obviously a re-release. It was just a disc game that was put onto cartridge. A kind of well-known games, most of these, to get, you know, because they were popular Atari 8-bit games, they were well known, they had a bit of star appeal. Another good example of that would be Rescue on Fractalus up the top there, widely regarded as one of the best games on the Atari 8-bit. So obviously, there we go, we've got the Lucasfilm games, so they repackaged that into a cartridge game, and on the back it would tell you what you needed. So for example, for Rescue on Fractalus, you need the keyboard. So if you had bought the standard edition of the XE Game System, you couldn't play this game because you didn't have the keyboard. So you really did need the keyboard. So we had those old classics. There was also games that were meant to have come out, but never did. So prototype games that they kind of got out the door and stuck on cartridges. So the best example of that would be Star Raiders 2. because that was going to be the last Starfighter, as many people would know. The film bombed. Atari didn't want to pay for the license, so it got stuck in development hell. But Atari decided to turn it into Star Raiders 2. They contacted the original programmer to do that. Actually, and the funny thing is, the guy who programmed Star Raiders 2 for the Atari 8-bit was then working for Atari Games, so they knew exactly who he was, and ended up and did Pit Fighter for Atari Games, among other things. So he was still in the industry, still quite well known. I've interviewed him a few times in Retro Gamer, actually, and for some reason his name totally escapes me right now, which is really annoying. Gary something. It's going to really annoy me now. If I remember, I'll say it. But yeah, so there we go. Star Raiders 2, so that says on the back as well that you need the keyboard and the joystick. But that was a kind of an old game that they republished. And then there was new games that they created specifically for the Atari 8-bit. And they, in a way, fall into two categories as well, because there was stuff that they converted from the 2600 or 7800. Well, not so much converted. It was stuff that was released across all of them. So like Dark Chambers, for example, was also on the 2600 and 7800. And there's an XE version, which was done by Chuck Peavy. Probably the best game Chuck Peavy did for the Atari 8-bit, actually. Really, aside from Panther, it was the best XE game he did, should I say. So that's there. Rescue Food Fight, which was a new one that was done. It was already on the 7800, and they made an XE Games System version, which is based on actually the code from the 7800 version. It's quite similar in many ways. We got a new version of Battlezone, which is quite interesting, because that was released to the 5200, and you might expect the XE Games System version to be the same as the 5200 version, because of course the 5200 was the first failed attempt to create a console out of the Atari 8-bit range. I probably should have mentioned that in the history earlier, actually, that they'd done that, but I'm mentioning it now. But the Atari 5200 had a different cartridge configuration, slightly different ROM, so that they weren't compatible with each other despite using the same hardware. So a lot of people say this is the 5200 done right. So it would have been easy to have just converted the 5200 version to play on the XE Game System, but they didn't. They did a new version, which is wireframe, proper wireframe 3D, unlike the 5200 version, and that's our lovely XE version of Battlezone. And down there is also, of course, got Barnyard Blast, which was also released as 7800, and that's a light gun game, so that will only work if you have the light gun, as it shows on the back. There's also like Crossbow, which is another example of that, and there's a really nice original game. Actually, I've got it down here. I'll grab it quickly. Crime Buster. I covered that in my XE exclusives video. Actually, a big bug hunt was in there as well. So I'll link that in the top right hand corner if you want to see some gameplay footage for Crime Buster, given that it's actually an exclusive for the XE Game System. There's not many of them, so that might interest you. So yeah, there was loads of titles released in these blue box formats, but of course you could use all of these old games as well. Well, not all of them, most of them. There were some that weren't compatible, but most of them were with the XE Game System, and tape and disc games too, if you connected up a tape recorder or a disc drive. There was actually an XE disc drive as well. I'll show a picture of that on the screen. A separate XE disc drive that you could go and buy that was in the same colours. But they're quite hard to find. Not very common at all. But they obviously look a lot nicer than buying the big old bulky 1050s, which were designed to match the looks of the XL computers. And it's nice to have everything kind of matching together, isn't it? So let's sum up. It's already been a longer video than I intended, but I felt like I had to cover this properly and cover it well. So is the XE Games System worth owning in the present day? Yeah, of course it is. Such a great system. It's one of my favourites, easily top 5 formats, the Atari 8-bit format in general. I love it so much. I've mentioned that a lot in my Atari 8-bit compendium, how much I love the Atari 8-bit range. I didn't own one as a kid. I had no experience of it as a kid. I was a ZX Spectrum owner, and then I went to the Atari ST as far as computers are concerned anyway. I'd also had a 2600 and a Lynx, so that's where a lot of my love for Atari came from. I only got to know the Atari 8-bit range in the present day, and it continues to blow me away with, you know, the amazing homebrew scene for it. It's got one of the best homebrew scenes of any system, if not the best. You know, with people producing ports of all sorts of classics, like the unbelievable homebrew port of Space Harrier that they released for the XE, which is just incredible, just blew me away. You know, there's no better 8-bit conversion of Space Harrier out there. Amazing new games like Atari Blast, which is just incredible. All sorts of stuff. There's so much Atari 8-bit homebrew. And there's a big competition they have every year as well for Atari 8-bit homebrew games, which really encourages that development. And you know, people are still pushing this machine to its very limits, producing games that you just, you know, never would have thought were possible back when the hardware was originally designed in 1979. You know, and that's what a lot of people need to remember when they see stuff like Space Harrier is that's playing on a computer from the 70s. You know, and people like to compare it to the Commodore 64, the Atari 8-bit range, but it came out 3 years earlier. You know, it was almost another generation. I mean, you have to remember that, you know, it came out before the ZX81, which didn't even have colour or sound. You know, that's how advanced the Atari 8-bit range was when it came out in 1979. You know, and back then its closest rival, the machine it was designed to compete with, was the Apple II, you know, and it blew the Apple II out the water in pretty much every regard. You know, really impressive hardware, and it's a shame that the modern Atari are so obsessed with the 2600 and seem to be ignoring the Atari 8-bit range. I mean, how good would a mini XE be? You know, a mini XE flashback console. Could you imagine that in a smaller form? It'd be amazing, wouldn't it? With loads of built-in games. That would be one, you know, I'd love to see. A mini XE, please, Atari. That's the console we want to see. And if you don't have an Atari 8-bit computer or console in your collection, then you're seriously missing out, and you need to correct that. So I hope you've enjoyed my look at the XE Games System. It's been a long one, but I hope it's been informative. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon. Bye-bye.
Welcome to the family. Get ready.